Hey, how you doing? It's Thursday. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's the 15th day of September 2022. It's 60 degrees and cloudy here at Site B. Yay! Maybe we'll get an actual fall for 5 minutes. You know what my new favorite hobby unfortunately seems to be? It seems to be correcting intentional mistakes that the dwindling 5E shallow end of the pool makes in order to stay relevant. We've talked about this before. We've talked about these 5e D&D posters who make these outrageous connections between one thing and another and then try and, mash it together and see how it's relevant to one D&D or 5th edition and how it makes them relevant. We've talked about the people who are like, oh, Fortnite's now canon in D&D and Hasbro's buying Netflix. Well, yesterday I had one about Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter and how he broke the internet, making the most money of any Kickstarter ever yesterday, which, of course, I don't know the exact sums that Brandon Sanderson's made for his Kickstarter, but it was more than $1 million, and it was nothing to do with D&D. I know now, of course, that they're saying that how Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter is going to influence Dungeons & Dragons and how, I guess, Hasbro now owns Brandon Sanderson. No, he's doing some miniatures for his Stormlight Archive setting, and the Kickstarter for the Stormlight Archive miniature Kickstarter made more than $1 million in one day, which, for Kickstarter now is nothing. Making $1 million on a Kickstarter now is like, I don't know, me opening the door. Nothing to do with D&D. Hasbro does not own Brandon Sanderson. He did not break Kickstarter by making the most money anybody has ever made in a Kickstarter. As far as I know, that's still held by Critical Role with the 10 million plus they made for Vox Machina. But we will check to see, just to be sure. Brandon Sanderson Kickstarter. Okay, so he made $41 million, which I guess was the record. He made that in this was for a book series he had coming up. It was called Secret Project. He kickstarted it in just over the past month. When was this? April. Well, I mean, it's in April. The article dates from April 1st, 2022. So, anyways, in April of 2022, Brandon Sanderson kickstarted a book series called Secret Project and made him about $40 million plus or minus without, now, of course, he has to write the books. But I guess that's it. But this happened in April. It is now September, so it did not happen yesterday. Brandon Sanderson's $40 million Kickstarter has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons or Hasbro. Hasbro does not own Brandon Sanderson or any of Brandon Sanderson's projects. The Kickstarter that he had that did make money yesterday was $1 million. So I guess the individual was confusing his $40 million Kickstarter from April and his $1 million Kickstarter from yesterday. The $40 million Kickstarter, of course, being about a series of books that has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. And the $1 million Kickstarter, which has to do with some toys and nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, yeah. So, congratulations, dude, that you got $40 million to write some books and $1 million to make some toys. Great on you. If you can make money off of the Kickstarter, great. I wish I could. So props to you, Mr. Sanderson. But again, nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. Just like the death of the Queen has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. Netflix's Cyberpunk has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. The CM Punk AEW situation has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. The non-existing situation between Chris Pine and Harry Styles has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. Fortnite has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. Walking Dead has nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. Documentaries about the Middle Ages, I guess, sort of have something to do with D&D, because you can always learn more about the Middle Ages by watching a documentary and then apply that to your D&D game. Not that D&D is historically accurate. The what's going on in the MCU, nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. I understand, that there's a desperate need to remain relevant, because that's what I try and do with the ever-changing world of the tabletop role-playing game hobby. And, of course, trying to remain relevant as the 5e dwindles and everybody's waited with bated breath for whatever one D&D is going to be. We'll find out more next month. So, yeah, I guess, I get trying to remain relevant, and I get trying to connect the dots in order to clickbait. But, just making shit up kind of just makes you look, at the end of the day, not really relevant and just sort of pathetic and stupid. So in response to the individual who got all angry at me yesterday and was like, oh, Brandon Sanderson made $40 million and how it's going to affect D&D and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, no, he made $40 million in April. He made $1 million yesterday, neither of which has anything to do with D&D. So unless Hasbro is planning on buying the IPs that are, held by Brandon Sanderson and his publishing company, yeah, nothing that Brandon Sanderson does has anything to do with D&D unless you're running a Brandon Sanderson-centric D&D campaign. So congratulations to Mr. Sanderson, but yeah, nothing to do with D&D. I don't know why this is newsworthy, but it does seem to be becoming a running theme of mine. Speaking of money, don't forget that I have merch, so if you want to support the OGGM adventures, consider subscribing and buying my merch. Blatant shout out for my merch. Till next time, I'm the OGGM. If you got something you want me to talk about, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you later.